Thanks, ladies and gentlemen. And thanks, Joetta. You know, home is the one place you can always go back to if the rest of the world turns its back on you. So I'm very, very happy to be back with you. And Dr. Rebecca, just 6 months here and already one of the Tri-Cities. Thanks for opening the doors of the college on a weekend. We know it costs you, personnel and everything else, turning the lights on. You're all on budgets. But thanks for this community support. It's just great to be back here, and I'm sure you all who live in this little corner of heaven on earth understand why, especially when I come out of Washington, D.C. But I would just tell you, flying in, you start dropping down in the airplane coming from the East Coast, somewhere over the Snake River, and you look out the left, and there's Walla Walla. Down below on the right, Dayton, Waitsburg, all the old places we used to go camping, hunting, all those kind of things. And then you see the Columbia come up, and you think, oh, thank God I'm home again. You know, it's beautiful. I would also say that there's probably no group I'm more comfortable coming to speak with than veterans, especially obviously hometown veterans where we have so much in common. I would just say too that none of us in this room ever served in the Army or the Navy, the Air Force, the Coast Guard, or the Marine Corps. We served in the United States Army, United States Navy, and you get the drift. We are always accountable to the American people. And now, having rather gloriously flunked my retirement program, I'm now not the Secretary of Defense, I'm the United States Secretary of Defense. That means, again, I am answerable to all the people in this country, and in many ways, people outside the country, but who respect and share what Americans stand for. So here today, what I want to do is just talk for a few minutes, kind of close the gap between a guy who left Richland when he was 17 years old and spent some time wandering around the world. Then we're going to open to questions, which is always the best part of something like this. But I do owe it to you to pay my respects, and that's why I'm here, to the veterans and their families. And I would just add the Gold Star families that are here with us today. We never forget. I think, too, it's a reminder as we get together that nothing started with us. I mean, you go back and think of the veterans of the Revolutionary War when we had a Continental Army, Continental Navy, Continental Marine Corps. Before we had a country, we had to fight for it in those days. And you look at what those veterans have gone through over the years. You look at a young lieutenant colonel named Alexander Hamilton who led that nighttime bayonet charge in order to shut off redoubt number 10, which was the one escape route the British had at Yorktown. And you realize it wasn't all set up to happen. It didn't just, magically happen. It took the blood, sweat, and tears of veterans over many years. And when you go on to Shiloh or to Belleau Wood, you go to Battle of Midway where our Navy triumphed, you go to the Battle of the Bulge in World War II, you go to Ploesti and what the Air Force went through in that fight. You go to Iwo Jima, you go to Chosin Reservoir, and we have a Chosin Reservoir veteran here today with us. When you look at Khe Sanh in Vietnam, that generation of Vietnam vets was the ones who raised me in the Marine Corps. When you look at it, you realize just what the record really is of our veterans, and that is no young troop today will ever wonder if he can handle something. He'll look back and say, if they listen to your NCOs, if the officers do their homework, you put it together, there's nothing worse than Khe Sanh, there's nothing worse than Chosin, there's nothing worse than Bougainville that waits for us out there. And we know that we'd never be asked to do more than what our veterans have already done. And I would just point out too that for most of us, the only fear that really was the overriding one we ever felt was not whether or not our troops would move against the enemy. We always knew when a squad leader pointed to someone and pointed forward, he might bite his lip all the way through, but he'd be up and running forward. The only real fear we had was not of the enemy, it was that we would let down you veterans. And so you look at it as a defense of a country that Dr. Rebecca spoke of, a country that actually gives hopes to millions of people around the world. And those hopes ring true everywhere out there. And by your service, I think you made your choice about what kind of world we want for our children. Do we want the world of violent jihadism for the veterans who are fighting today's wars, who are well represented here today? Or do we want the world defined by Abraham Lincoln when he advised us to listen to our better angels? And I think America can be likened to a bank in some ways. If you want to take something out, you have to put something in. So speaking to the veterans here of all the wars, certainly to the ones who fought in Iraq and Afghanistan, and now Syria, thank you. I would just say that this is the first of our major wars that we have fought without resorting to the draft. We always had a lot of volunteers, but ever since the Revolutionary War, we actually used the draft to bring people in. And for the first time ever, these wars have been fought over many years, very, very tough to explain wars with all high-quality volunteers. And so the tradition keeps on, is my point. It didn't start with us. It will not end with us if we pass that on. And I think we can reassure all veterans in the room that, especially here, the ones who have fought most recently, you have sent a necessary message. And whether that message was sent to fascism in World War II, to communism and wars after that, and certainly to jihadists today, that you're not going to scare us by hurting us. We can come back swinging, and we will, and free men and women can fight like the Dickens. So you'd best to listen to our diplomats. You really don't want to deal with the Department of Defense. And I think for all of us, I know, too, that the very tragedy of war is something none of you need lessons about here today. So we'll do our level best to deter war. We'll do our level best to back up our president and our diplomats as they try to work their magic. But at the same time, we have to be ready. And you look back on in your youth when you answered your country's call, and you had to look past oftentimes the hot political rhetoric of your wars, and you had to leave behind the well-lit avenues of life as you went off to the other side of the world. And I think when you signed that blank check payable to the American people with your lives, that you really put a lot on the line. And most importantly, you made a full personal commitment at times when there were people in the country who questioned it. And to step forward in, it's easy to be loyal when everything's going smooth. The tough time to be loyal is when there's 100 reasons not to be. That's when loyalty counts. And you counted, you stood up and counted. One of the most articulate Supreme Court justices, associate justices in the history of our court was Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., himself an infantry vet from the Civil War. And he said, here's a quote from him, he said, "All life is action and passion. Action and passion." Interesting words. It is required of a man, and may I add here, or woman, that he or she should share the passion and action of his time at the peril of being judged not to have lived. Well, I think when you young patriots proved that you were more concerned with living life fully than in your own longevity and freely facing daunting odds and the random nature of death and wounds on the battlefield, you made quite a statement about how much this country is worth fighting for. And I think so long as you maintain that commitment after you leave active service, as long as you maintain that same commitment to others and that same enthusiasm for life's challenges that you felt in yourself and your shipmates, in your comrades and your buddies, then you'll never question, when you grow old like me, you'll never question whether or not you lived fully. And that is worth a lot more than all the gold in Fort Knox as you're looking back over a life well lived. And for those of you who served in close combat, and again, quoting Holmes, he said it's an incommunicable experience. There aren't many of you, but I would say that there's a quote that comes out of the Civil War era that says, "Combat is a test of character. It makes bad men worse, but good men better." And I think you must remember that, because this is a choice. We are masters of our own character, choosing what we will stand for in this life. And I think the veterans have had a unique privilege, that of having seen the tenacious spirit of our lads, and like those young grunts who were preparing for a patrol by loosely wrapping tourniquets on their limbs so they could swiftly stop their own bleeding if their legs were blown off. Yet day after day, they stoically patrolled. And the reason I bring this up is adversity is a building block in your character. Adversity reveals a man to himself, and young patriots coming home from such patrols are worth more than gold, for nothing they face will ever be that tough again. And I think that I was privileged many years, as you know, because I was in the Marine Infantry. I was privileged to march or fight alongside many veterans, people who are now veterans. And a question does come to mind: what can I do to repay our country for the privilege of fighting, for the privilege of learning things that only you in this room could have taught me? For today, I really feel sorry for those who were not there with us when trouble loomed. And I sometimes wonder how to embrace those who were not with us, those who were not so fortunate to discover what we were privileged to learn. And what was important? I remember asking Marines one night what was important to them right then as we tried to connect from an old gray-haired general to young lads going into a fight. And I remember one saying, nothing, just make sure we got ammo and water, General. No Maserati, no problem, you know? They were unconcerned with the more superficial aspects of what sometimes becomes our goals when we leave active service. And I think you keep that with you, hold dear to those things that said it's not about having a big fancy car, it's about friendships, it's about putting others first. And I still remember two young grunts walking back. I'd been off talking to some people. I'm a big talker, as you can tell. And I was off talking to some of the guys, and I was walking back to catch up with my team. And two young grunts came by, completely dripping wet. They'd been bathing in a filthy, dirty canal stream. Only thing really clean on them was their rifles. I said, "Hey, how you guys doing?" And they just laughed and they said, "Living the dream, General, living the dream." It's that sort of spirit that take life's tough times in stride. And so you look now at our fellow citizens who weren't there with us, and we realize that America is just too large at heart, way too large at heart, for divisions between us. And if we, I think, become keenly aware of anything in war, it's those words on every coin we ever carry in our pockets of e pluribus unum, out of many, one. And I think that we veterans who did our patriotic duty, we didn't do any more than veterans in the past. I often feel like I didn't do as much as the veterans in the past. But we all need to come home like veterans of those wars, roll up our sleeves and contribute to our community, our school district, our parish, our team, our workspace. We just need to come back and get on with it like the greatest generation did. And I think we deserve nothing more than a level playing field in America, and because we endured nothing more, and certainly often less than other vets of other wars, and they came home and made good lives, built companies, served as teachers, served as coaches, served as doctors, and we should do the same. We also have learned that in tough times in the military, the cynicism that too often seems to pervade our society today, that cynicism in our old days, in our past life, was just another way to give up. And in the military, we consider cynicism or giving up simply as forms of cowardice, and we don't raise cowards in the U.S. military. I think no matter how bad any situation is that our country faces, no matter how tough it is, cynicism would have no positive impact. And watching the news, you might notice that cynicism and victimhood often seem to go hand in hand, but not so for veterans. Not so for veterans. I had a professor at a college, and she told me she didn't know much about the military, never very interested in the military, but she said, "My veterans are by far the best students I have." Very interesting comment from her, and it is a reflection again of the character that rides through all of you. And now many of you, most of you, having seen the old moon shine somewhere on the other side of the world, and having worked with others of many cultures, having worked in one of the most diverse teams on earth, that of the U.S. military, and having faced down some pretty grim circumstances without losing either your sense of humor or your moral balance under conditions when war's realities will scrape away the veneer of civilization on any of us. We have learned that nothing can stop our spirit unless we ignore Lincoln's call to listen to our better angels. So I would just also make some, I always find the best words to explain what I'm thinking about in old books. And here's one from Alexander Dumas. And to all of you veterans, you should be satisfied with the way you have conducted yourselves, with no remorse for the past, confident regarding the present, and full of hope for the future. So when you retire to bed, you should sleep the sleep of the brave, my fine young veterans, and you're all young compared to me, or nearly all of you. And I would tell you, too, that there was the veterans of World War II that raised me in Richland and all of the people of my generation, men and women who'd gone off to factories and ships and battles in World War II. And they went out there and they did their job. And many of us wanted to be, when we were growing up, like them. And certainly one of those veterans, a tank destroyer unit, a lieutenant, and a tank destroyer unit. And by the way, tank destroyers were built because we could build them faster than tanks, and the enemy had a lot of tanks. And so they would go out in these tank destroyers, which were not as capable of a tank as a tank in all combat, but they could take out a tank. And Lieutenant Jackie Robinson went out and fought in a tank destroyer unit in our U.S. Army. And he was so proud of who he was when he was playing ball. We all wanted to be like Jackie Robinson, sliding into home plate and standing up to the cheer of a crowd that maybe in previous years wouldn't have cheered him. And he wrote his own epitaph, and I went up to New York City to see it. I was in New York City for another reason years ago, and I went out on a windy, January, rainy day in New York. And you haven't really lived till you've been in New York City in the middle of winter as the wind and the rain's coming, and my bodyguard's over there looking at me like I'm crazy. And I had to go see this. On his tomb, he wrote his own epitaph, and his epitaph said that basically, I'll quote it, "A life is not important except in the impact it has on other lives." So that's the charge to veterans. Now you take all those privileged learning opportunities you had and you turn it to your local community, your state, your county, your city, wherever you can, your volunteer food bank, Meals on Wheels, and you just roll up your sleeves as before. As General William Sherman said when he was bidding farewell to his army in 1865 at the end of that terrible Civil War, he said, "As in war you have been good soldiers, so in peace you will make good citizens." And so it goes along the same tradition. It continues on. And I would point out that we have a legacy here on the Columbia River, because the first time in our country's history when a black man and a white man, a Native American and a woman and a man all voted as equals was on a long-range Army reconnaissance patrol that came right down this river outside of where we're at here. It actually camped on Bateman's Island. It's known as the Lewis and Clark Expedition, and the U.S. Army has every reason to be proud. That's the first time in our history that we all voted as equals. I also want to close just by noting something. Like I said, I was raised by the greatest generation, and here today is a friend. I trust he's here somewhere in the crowd. He's a charter member of the greatest generation. At age 17, he's in Missouri, and he takes off and enlists in the U.S. Marine Corps to fight in World War II. By 18 years old, he was on Bougainville fighting, and then he goes through more battles of the Pacific Campaign. When he was 21 years old, Jimmy Belk, in 1946, comes home from war, and he's got some family members living in Richland, Washington, so he comes here. He subsequently met the prettiest girl in the nation, he's assured me of this, at the thrifty drugstore, and they got married and literally lived happily for many decades together. It wasn't always easy, but good times and tough times, even heartbreaking times. Through it all, like all the greatest generation, he stayed stoic, and he was a real man, and I would just tell you that he's one of those who gave us this freedom, gave us this country, this freedom from fascism, and that we enjoy today. It's our job now to make sure we live up to what Jimmy did and his comrades in arms, and we turn it over in as good a shape or better as we found it. And that sense of responsibility to pass it on must ride with each one of us adults as we look at the children. So Keith, if you're here, could you have Jimmy stand up for just a minute? Jimmy, please stand. I know you're getting old up there. "93 years old, ladies and gentlemen, he's still got the spirit, you know? And there's nothing I can say that can top, Jimmy, your example, so I'm going to shut up and take questions now. So who's got the first question? It's going to get really weird if I'm looking at you and you're looking at me and nobody's talking, okay? So who's got the first question for me? If you can't hear it, I'll repeat it. So go ahead and let me know what's on your mind.
Workforce. A lot of folks get out, diesel mechanics, working in the air wing, and we're not competitive anymore. And we're coming home to jobs that are maybe a little lower paying than what we would expect with the knowledge that we bring. We bring a lot of experience. And I'd like to know what we're doing to ensure that DD-14 maybe equates to something a little bit more for us.
Yeah, the question about what we're doing about this, I think every veterans, all the veterans who came home from the wars, basically revolution, Civil War, they went to the farm. They'd farmed before, they're farming again. After World War I, they came home to a more industrial society, but it had been going on for a while. They meshed back in. As a matter of fact, the only thing that we wanted for the veterans coming home from World War I, I've seen the posters, is when he comes home, a job. That was seen as that was it. And the job still has the dignity of giving someone purpose in life, way to feed their family, and for him or her to look proud at what they're doing in the community, be able to help others. So what are we doing today when the entire world's awash in change and technology is changing fast? It's not so much about manual labor, although that's honest labor and that's honest work as well. And I think the most important thing is we have never had a more lucrative, frankly, GI Bill for education. Never in our history have you had more opportunity to have the costs picked up by the U.S. government. And so I think the most important thing is, frankly, I was down in Silicon Valley for 3 years after I got out of the Marines. You'd be surprised how many companies down there were willing to take any veteran with any background because they knew they'd be sober, they'd be at work each day, they'd roll up their sleeves and give 100%. The character was there. But in many cases, I think you do have to go in and get educated when you come out. Like as an infantryman, my ability to hit somebody at 80 meters is not really paid for very much in a civilian society, you know? So the thing is, you do have to adapt, you have to improvise, just like in military, you have to overcome the obstacles. But right now, I've never seen the country more aware and more appreciative in real ways, not just saying thank you for your service, which personally I always appreciate when I hear that from somebody, but also that they're going to give our young veterans a chance to go back to school and get the skills they need. So I think the most important thing is you're a master of your own future. Get into school, find something, read the book. Don't just get something that's fascinating for your education. You can do that as kind of like your secondary field of study. It's a lot better to have a steady paycheck than to be fascinating, okay? So make sure you study something that'll open doors for jobs, and then you got the time to go off and do your hobby, whether it be, you know, reading literature or climbing mountains or something like that. So get a good hard job, a good hard education for the good hard jobs, and man, they'll beat a path to your door, young lady. What else on your minds?
Hey, sir, I got the second one. So like we talked before, my background, 22 years in the military, coming out of U.S. Army Cyber Command. I now currently teach here at CBC, the Cybersecurity Department. What is your effect on seeing cybersecurity as becoming more and more as the next generation? Currently, like she said, the technical skills that we need in that workforce to defend our nation for that cyber attacks that are coming. You see them now and the increase that we're going to see in the future.
Yeah, you know, Dr. Rebecca, this is what I'm driving at about veterans that come out. They become great coaches, great teachers, because really anyone who stayed in the military for long became a coach and a teacher, a mentor. That's what they really do for a living. So on cyber, that's probably one of the few areas, the ones who come out with that skill are immediately employable. And I saw that again down in Silicon Valley. They could not get enough of them down there. And the pay is so good that we have trouble keeping the young guys and gals in because they've got the skills, but they can quadruple or make, some, in one case, 7 times as much starting the day they walked out. One young gal told me. She stayed in the reserves, so we didn't completely lose her. But I would just tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that cyber now is turning into a very clearly a double-edged sword, and our country is losing a lot of its intellectual property. One of the reasons for the discussion about putting tariffs on China goes right to the heart of the theft of intellectual property. And I think that what we've got to do is recognize that this is going to be as important as the policemen on the beat we have out there protecting our children on the way to school and making certain that merchants can have decent stores and not have them broken into. Just as important, we don't want people's lives broken into. We're going to need cybersecurity, and a college like CBC is exactly where you can go to get the kind of skill that allows you not just to be fascinating, but to actually have a job when you get out. So that might be an idea, young lady. Go take that class and you'll be surprised what happens for you. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, way back there in the back. Yeah, you see what happened, ladies and gentlemen, there came a thought at one point that we would not need basically what are called naval rifles. Those are those big guns on Navy ships that can shoot a long distance. And as a result, we don't have as many as we once had. That some of the older vets in the room will recall. Show you how old I am. I'm in the last, I commanded the last Marine assault where a U.S. battleship, 16-inch guns, were firing in support of us, and that was in 1991. So we don't have those, but today we have aircrafts whose capability is so different. It's like the difference, just in 20 years, it's like the difference between a biplane and a jet. And if you take the jets that supported me in 1991, today, just a few decades later, they're so much more capable that in the old days we used to think, well, how many airplanes do I need to take out this target? Today we think, how many targets can one airplane take out? So you see the effect of the technological superiority with precision. The challenge is that we've got to make certain we don't adopt one preclusive form of warfare where an adversary says, I know exactly how they're going to fight, so I will build a lot of anti-aircraft systems, and all of a sudden we could be in trouble, which goes to the heart of why the question is asked. So the U.S. Navy is looking at this closely. They've got a number of programs from directed energy to much longer range shooting weapons on the same ship. Actually, it's the same gun in some cases, but it can reach 3 times, 4 times as deep. So there's a number of efforts underway for it. The bottom line is, I think your question is accurate because it implies, it assumes that we've got to have this. I agree 100%. And remember, I don't have stress, I create it, so we will be moving forward. Okay? So, what else? What else on your mind? Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, I have.
Yes, sir.
I have something for you. It is on? Okay, thank you. First of all, I want to thank you for being here today. It really means a lot to us veterans here. My name is Kirby Hammond. I'm a Vietnam veteran. I think we all know that our freedoms come from our veterans. And I think the only thing that we really ask for as veterans is to have a country that we're proud of. And I really have a request, and I I would like to say something to Trump, and I think you're the only way I can get it to him. It's a little difficult for a Army private to talk to a general, so anyway, here's what I'd like to ask him. I need to tell him to keep doing what he's doing, and I need him to reach around and grab that. In the rage of battle, I think he needs to do what we've done, to reach down and get the energy and the courage to stay the course. And I'd also ask you to ask him, is for us, if we want a country that we're proud of, that he needs to clean the house and take out the trash.
Well, thank you. And again, as I said, it was the Vietnam generation, your generation. I did not fight in Vietnam, but it was your generation that raised me and taught me the grim skills that I had to have to be a Marine infantry officer, and was the NCOs and the captains who really put their thumbprint on me. And I agree about having a country we can be proud of. And we're building a country here, as we all know, and it's noble work and it's hard work. You have to go a long ways to find a country willing to look in the mirror and say, let's not get complacent. We're not there yet. We're not there. We're going to keep working and keep working and keep working on it. But I would also just tell you that you mentioned about the difference between our ranks. I think we're co-equal when it comes to a commitment to this country such as you defined, sir. So I'll carry the message. The way I look at it, the defense of this country is not a partisan issue. It's a bipartisan issue. It's something that I have tremendous support from both Republicans and Democrats. Joetta, you mentioned earlier that I had to get a waiver just in order to be put into this job. And I had Republican and Democrat House of Representatives and Senate support. And when I was confirmed 98-1 in the Senate. They do the confirmation. So you can see there in the one area, and for all the political, we have a raucous democracy. We're going back and forth. That's what democracies do. But at the same time, when it comes to the defense of our country, if you're willing to fight for America and you're willing to pull together, if you can meet the high standards to come in, and by the way, right now only 29% of our 18 to 24-year-olds can meet the standard to enlist as a private in your U.S. Army. Gives you an idea that just how special the veterans are that we are getting today to serve, and that will be our veterans in the future. So we'll keep rolling up our sleeves. We've never believed in this country that we build a country by waiting for Washington to do something. We've always thought in America, we all roll up our sleeves. We have, like I said, we have food banks, we have Meals on Wheels, we have GI Bill to get young people in college who otherwise couldn't afford it, and they can come out if they're frugal with very little debt. We've got a lot of programs going on to make the country better. That requires initiative and aggressiveness on the part of all of us, the same kind of initiative and aggressiveness that we have in the U.S. Army in order to make this country better, because we're never going to be satisfied. We're always going to find problems with it and keep trying to improve it, and we'll keep at it. But I'll carry the message. Go ahead. Yes, sir.
Hoorah, General. I'm Corporal Chisholm from 1st Battalion, 7th Marines. Last time we talked was in Najaf, Iraq. And I was just wanting to question about what we were doing differently in the transitioning out of the military part of, like in the Marine Corps in 2004. What's different today in the transitioning part? I know a lot of people are kind of struggling. I got into the Boilermaker Union through Helmets to Hard Hats, and I wasn't really aware of that through the transition progress, and there was a lot of ups and downs after getting out and not knowing, where to go next for the next mission. Semper Fi, sir.
Well, Semper Fi, Corporal, it looks like you still got both your legs too, so that's pretty good coming out in a Joff fight, I'd just tell you that the transition courses, what we're trying to do right now is look at Army, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard, Marine, find the best of each one of those and create the course that's best for transitioning. Sometimes I think it took me 12 milliseconds to transition, when I got out finally, because it's just, if you're coming back to a family, if you're coming back to a community that welcomes you, frankly, at that point. So I think it's about all of us pulling together. That's one of the reasons I want the veterans to share all the good things. They don't have to share everything. I understand we're all a little reticent about sharing some things, and it's not an insignificant moment the first time you draw down and pull the trigger. But at the same time, there's a lot you can share of your character. And as you do that, you create, I think, a teamwork that allows veterans to be welcomed back. Just the fact that all of you are here today and we have a veterans organization that's opening the door and bringing people in, saying, well, here's the way you go about signing up for school. I mean, something as simple as that. If you're coming straight from high school, you got your guidance counselor and you got all that. Well, you just need a little bit of a guidance counselor, like when you're on a patrol in Indian country. It says, the point guy who kind of says, here's what you're coming up on. Watch out for the rocks here, there's ice there, and you keep going. So I think the most important thing is we just put out that helping hand for each other. We did when we're on some hillside, and you're helping your buddy up the hill, And right now, I think that will never be fully. We shouldn't even try to replace with a 1-week transition program, whatever it is. Even no matter if I get best of breed on that, that's not going to take the place of all of us helping out everybody who comes back and making certain that they know they're welcome back in this community, whether they grew up here, as I was so fortunate to do, or they're a complete outsider, like Jimmy was when he came back from World War II and got on with his life here. So we're working on it, but I don't think I just don't want to give the sense that this is going to substitute for all the good things you're doing as demonstrated here today, Corporal, and Semper Fi. Yeah, go ahead, back there. Yeah, go ahead. Okay, yeah, it's a good question, actually. Basically, ladies and gentlemen, this is a friend. He was an interpreter. The enemy would definitely have killed him and his wife and his children because that's what they do. I've dealt with this enemy since 1979. I do not patronize them. You cannot simply turn your back and say, I'm tired of this, I'm going to walk away. When they say girls are property and they don't get to go to school, I've talked with them and they didn't arrive at that through logic. They're not going to logically be drawn away from it. All we can do is buy time with the military and hopefully educate their younger generation so they don't have the same poison in them. But I would, as far as what's going on in Iraq right now, yeah, Maliki's running again, but the current guy, Abadi's a much better guy. He is the one who put the Iraqi army back together, not perfectly, and we got problems there, but put it back together. And with American help, we went back in. You know, we had pulled everyone out. We went back in, but we're doing it by, with, and through our allies now. In other words, your American lads are out there coaching them on the battlefield, calling for NATO air support, that sort of thing, as we fight ISIS. And so it's a much larger effort. How are we going to put that country that you grew up in back together? I've talked to a number of our allies out in the region. They are willing to go in and help more. They're watching this election coming up. But I think you're going to see a lot more help for Iraq in the months ahead, years ahead, assuming that Iraqis get to choose their own president. And you think of everything you have in your mind as a picture of the Middle East. Think of a country right now where you can't drive down the streets and see any blank wall. Everywhere you go are posters of vote for me, that sort of thing. We have people who have never talked to each other getting together in political efforts to try and gain a seat in the parliament. So as imperfect as it is, and it doesn't look like ours, and I realize it's not going to look like that for a long, long time, ISIS is being defeated and Iraqis are coming back to the forefront. And by the way, there are 73 countries and international organizations, including the Arab League, NATO, Interpol, very important, European Union, plus 60-odd countries that are united in this fight against ISIS. And we've put in our people too. But just for an example, in Syria, I believe we have lost 2 killed and several dozen wounded in that fight. And the SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces, have lost thousands killed and many thousands wounded. So you see who's carrying the burden now. And in Iraq, the same thing, where the Iraqi army took very heavy casualties to free Mosul and those areas. So it's a very complex battlefield, and in Syria, Western Iraq, it's the most complex I've ever dealt with, but I think we're on the right track. But it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be there like 6 months from now after one more election. We're going to have to keep working it and working by, with, and through our allies, not carrying the full burden ourselves. Down in Africa, you see the French, who as soon as Mali was going to fall, decided they were not going to watch the international community dither. And in a brilliantly led campaign, over 4,000 French Foreign Legion paratroopers, Marines have been down there helping the African troops throw Boko Haram on their back. And we do have U.S. military down there supporting the French and the African troops as they fight. But it's a handful compared to the tens of thousands that the African nations and the 4,000, more than 4,000 the French have, who are actually leading the advisory effort. There's a lot going on that if you were to watch our news, you'd think we're the only ones doing anything. It's exactly the opposite. So keep the faith, partner. We'll see if we can pull it off. Go ahead, back here in a white shirt. Just remember again, if a president asks you to do something and you're a veteran, you know what the answer is. It doesn't matter whether it's Republican or Democrat. If you're asked to do something for the country, you do it. That's what veterans do. And I was brought up by you all, and every jam I got into, you got me out of, So bottom line is I'm willing to do my tour of duty, but this is my final tour of duty. Next time you'll find me up on Badger Mountain smiling at the sunshine. Go ahead, young lady.
I got a backdrop to a question I need to make. Back in 1981, President Reagan signed in a combat action badge. Now, from what I understand, that that particular award is rarely issued. But when you talk about the infantry, they have their combat infantry.
Can you come on up here, because there's an echo right now, I think because you're right in front of me, and I'm getting a repeat. Say that and say it again, please.
Yeah, on President Reagan signing a combat action back in people who do not get especially like the artillery and a few other people, the supply personnel, they all go to the same combat. They have the same set of risks. That they do combat. President Reagan signed I'm wondering, as a secretary, can you work with President Trump in getting all of the other MOSs that are not specifically
Yeah. Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, in the Army, go ahead. Thanks very much, sir. In the Army, they're given a, there's only infantry can get the combat infantry badge because it was something done during World War II to recognize those who had gone into close combat. Then, because of the nature of the war, where it's a little bit different now, there's something called the combat action. It's a bayonet that the Army gives only to the Army. For the Navy corpsmen, the SEALs, the Marines, airmen, you don't get that. It was done not by President Reagan. It was done by the Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army. Was the authorizing person. Secretary of the Army put it into effect. And I try to leave each of the services to their own culture. And the reason for that is it's a great advantage to have an Army that's not trying to act like the Air Force. The Navy, I can guarantee you, they're mighty weird people, but I love them. Okay?
Thank you.
But each of the services has got to be able to reward the behavior it thinks it needs on the battlefield, in the sky, on the sea, wherever. So I'll take this back. I'll certainly pass your thought over to the Chief of Staff or the Secretary of the Army. I will tell you that I see an awful lot of these badges. It may have used to have been that way, but today, with the veterans who are out there today, who were not infantrymen, but went into combat, I see a lot of those badges. And so I think the times and the character of the war has changed enough that problem probably no longer exists. But I'll certainly pass this over to the Army to look at. And thanks for bringing it up.
General
Young lady,
Mattis.
you've been very patient down here. Go ahead, please.
At Fort Benning, safe and secure. He's been to the parade in New York. He doesn't need that anymore. And it's so nice to see you, Jim. I gave Jim his high school diploma.
It's good to see you again. It's the last honest thing I ever got in this world, you know? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. But I don't want to say that right now because this is streaming live, but I agree with you.
General Mattis.
Yeah, well, we'll do our best. I think that that's the hope of every mother and father, brother and sister of one of our troops. But I do want you all to understand that when they sign that blank check payable with their lives, they're all aware of what they're doing. They're all volunteers. And we'll try to keep them out of harm's way. But ultimately, they're what stand between us and losing those freedoms, and I believe that. So thank you for the character. Yeah.
General Mattis, if I may. When you speak, I'm just encouraged by your eloquency, and I thank you for your time, for coming back to Tri-Cities. 3 weeks ago, I swore in as an Army reservist, and I'm privileged and proud to be shipping out in August. I'd like to just simply take these few seconds not to ask a question, but rather among veterans and yourself, just simply May is a Military Appreciation Month, and I just want to thank every single one of you veterans here, and thank you, General Mattis, for all your service.
Thank you. I do think of it as a privilege that I was able to do this. Let's go. You got the best hair in the outfit. What's on your mind, young lady?
So I was wondering, what is the current administration doing to prevent sexual assault in the military?
Yeah, what are we doing to prevent sexual assault in the military? You know, we bring in 250,000 people every year into the U.S. Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps. And the NCOs, the young officers who have to mold them into responsible, respectful people. I will just tell you that having spent 3 years out of the military at a very good school, I was on Stanford's campus, but I also went to about a dozen schools a year. I saw conduct on colleges that would have earned any soldier in the U.S. Army a court-martial. I see a coarser society the further I got from military bases where obscenity in front of women is somehow okay. Now, it is not okay, you know. When in any society where women and children don't come first, you got to get a little worried about it, frankly. And so what we do in the military, I've made it very clear, you've got to put yourself as a leader out and say, this is what I stand for. And we all nod. And then I tell them, and this is what I will not fricking tolerate. It's that simple. And at that point, as much as I love the young people who go into a fight, if they're going to act like a jerk, if there's going to be any, I accept casualties on the battlefield. I grudgingly lose anybody. I'll do everything I can to keep the lads alive out there. But I don't accept one casualty from sexual assault. That is nothing that we stand for. And so in this case, the way I look at the military is the military needs to be the same role model on this that Lewis and Clark expedition was on equality of voting. Long before women had the right to vote, long before blacks had the right to vote, there was the U.S. Army on a long-range patrol saying, we're all voting, we're putting our lives on the line. By the way, they were voting whether or not to cross the mouth of the Columbia River where they could drown in order to get over to the Astoria side. And they all voted as equals and decided to take the chance and pull together in those canoes as they went across. And I bring that up because sexual assault cuts to the very heart of unit cohesion. It cuts to the very heart of trust. And I tell you, I would love to fight an enemy unit that does not have unit cohesion, that does not have trust, because you'll take them down very easily. So this is a blow to military capability. And I realize we bring a lot of people in from a society today that seems to be coarser in many ways, which I think sets some of the conditions for that kind of behavior. But we will not tolerate it, and we will hold people accountable. Most of all, I want young NCOs with the force of personality who will say, this is not going to happen in my outfit. End of discussion. I'm not into hearing about your midlife crisis or that you'd had too many beers or something. I'm not interested in it. But I expect the military will lead on this issue like it's led on so many other issues. Thanks for the question, by the way. Here, go ahead, sir. You've got a lot of questions. Go ahead. You stay seated right there.
This is not a question. It's just a little bit of trivia. My daughter here graduated from Pasco High the same year you graduated from Richland High. And then she also went to Washington and graduated in Central Washington, same as you.
Hey, thanks, young lady. Yeah, thanks, young lady. It's good to be home again, as you can see. Go ahead, please.
Yes, sir. My question is regarding the suicide rate among military veterans that has seemed to skyrocket. When I was in the Air Force, the base I was stationed at actually led the Air Force in suicide rate. Someone in my own squadron committed suicide. I've got a brother-in-law that's active duty right now that's dealt with it. And I'm just wondering what the Department of Defense is doing to kind of help alleviate that situation.
It always blows my mind that for the guys who don't die on the battlefield, how would they even consider losing something so precious that they had fought for alongside their comrades in arms? And I realize that when you're young, passions run right on the surface. You know, there's a lot of things too that worry me about whether or not we have the connections in our society anymore, whether it be looking out for one another, the friendliness where you didn't care who somebody else voted for, they were still your neighbor. You cared more about whether or not their daughter was going to get into college or their son who had, had cancer was going to make it. You know, it seems like we've gotten more and more isolated from each other. And I especially noticed it after I left the military, where there was such a common bond among service members. And you got out, and I looked at kids on campuses at times. I thought, wow, that's strange. There's a book out by a guy named Sebastian Junger, and the first third of the book is more articulate than I can be on this. But I think the most important thing is to recognize you really cannot care more about someone else's life than they care. So what you have to do is you have to become a comrade to them and make certain that people know that you care about. I used to teach young officers, those troops aren't going to care about how much you know about tactics and weapons and that sort of thing until they know you care about their lives, because when you say do it, they've got to know that you've done everything possible to keep them alive as they go forward. So I think it's the same thing in the Japanese tradition. Life needs a warrior's focus. You fight the great game of life. And I think the Japanese have something there. And it's interesting how many of our people who come in many cases from poor backgrounds don't end up doing that. There's something going on there that I can't understand. I go through the statistics. I wish that we knew as much about the people who died before they died at their own hand as we always seem to find out afterwards when we go through an exhaustive investigation. So I think the most important thing is that we need young NCOs and young officers with the social energy, because they're the ones who are in touch with them every day. We need them to have the energy to let people know we give a darn about you, we respect you because you're one of us. But when they get out, I think that's when the local communities become important. And you just can't step in and order the person how to think. He's got to be persuaded by the very commitment of their friends. I mean, it's always been said the loneliest place in the world is to be on a battlefield if you don't have friends there. I mean, it's only your friend. The only reason I'm here today, I guarantee you, is because of my friends. So, I mean, you got to keep your friendships, family tight. But I don't have a good answer for you. We're doing everything I think we possibly can, bringing in experts to talk about it, explain things to us. At the end of the day, you still scratch your head and say, how could this have happened in my unit? But I'm not going to go down unless there's some kind of bad leadership. I'm not going to go down and find fault with every corporal, every sergeant down there, every second lieutenant down there who had it happen. I know they're trying their hearts out. We'll keep at it. Yes, sir. All right, here, go ahead, please.
First of all, thank you for coming out.
Oh, sure.
Secondly, I appreciate your leadership and everything you did to teach my fellow officers when I served underneath you with 2nd Battalion, 11th Marines during the push, Blue Diamond. I think, to caveat off of the 22 a day, I think one of the biggest fights that I fought when I first got out and I came out here was father's rights. When I first went into the Marine Corps, it was about 50% divorce rate. I didn't care about that because I wasn't one of those. I didn't know about marriage. I didn't care about marriage. All I wanted to do was be a Marine. I since had, obviously, a couple tours and have since, that marriage is gone. But I have 2 little children that I came to this, my new town, my new home, to be with. It is the hardest fight I've ever fought. I've been on the battlefield. I've got 2 combat action ribbons. I've been a recruiter. Fighting for my children is the hardest fight I've ever fought. Now, I'm not just advocating for veterans, but for fathers' rights. What is the current administration doing, or is there anything out there that the current administration is doing to help fathers fight for their children and not be told by the judge, sorry, you were gone for 4 years while you were serving your country. That's why you don't have your children, and that's why they no longer have your last name.
I appreciate the situation. As the Secretary of Defense, I've got a pretty full portfolio right now, and I don't have authority over something like that. But I think it goes, do the judges understand why you were gone? I think it'd be very hard for a judge to find a father guilty of abandonment because he was off fighting. And I would also say that that's why communities working together. You have people in this audience here today, prosecutors. I met judges 2 nights ago at another event, and they're putting together a veterans court here right now. It's underway. They're trying to get the thing all, the framework, all those things that are very important if you want it to go right, and they're putting it together. So I would just salute that effort, but anything that grows the community together, civilian, military, veterans, young people, old people, those are the ways we break down misunderstandings. And just keep doing whatever is right, I can disobey that lady at least once or twice. Okay, so go ahead. What you got there, big one?
My soldiers are transitioning. Not only my soldiers, their employers, their families face transition every month. Lots of large agencies, government agencies, state agencies are easily absorb that type of transition with their soldiers coming and going. Small businesses have an extremely hard time with that. My question is, what's being done to support small businesses? Because not every soldier wants to work in cyber command or be a doctor or a nurse. They want to work in agriculture. They want to work, as a tech, labor. What's being done for the small employer to support that? Yeah,
it's interesting. There are programs, I've spoken at a couple of them around the country, where people, not just in this job, but even in my last time, like when I was at Stanford, where you can learn farming, everything from bookkeeping to what crops to where do you go to get help from a county agricultural agent to help you, and actually turning out veterans into farmers, small farmers, not corporate, not a guy who moves irrigation pipe, but one who really runs his own farm. And I know that the small business loan effort directly targeted at veterans is very well used. I've met a number of those veterans around who've taken advantage of those programs. And so I think it's pretty robust right now. I'll make a note. I got someone in the back writing down notes. You'll know to write this one down. And I will go back and I'll talk to Department of Agriculture, and there's also, she's cabinet level in the President's cabinet, and her job is small business loans to make certain that, I'll just pulse it and make sure that this is what I think it is. If it's not, I got your unit and I'll be writing to you. Otherwise, I'll just confirm it is there, and just make sure your people are checking the small business loans, because they're helping a lot of people right now. I'd love to see veterans in the front rank. Okay, we take one more here, okay? Go ahead, sir, Pappy.
Jim, in reference to your comment that you may someday be sitting on laptop. Now, you've told me over the years several times that you were coming back to God's country and going to hunt and fish with me.
Yeah.
Yeah, Pappy, yeah. I'd like to know, can I take that to the bank? We all love having you doing what you're doing and being there and looking out for us in the country.
Yeah.
But I also would like to know, can I take that to the bank that you're going to come back here someday and fish with me with the right rope?
Well, Pappy, you look like you still got 1 or 2 good hunting trips and fishing trips in you, so I'll get back, good Lord willing, the creek don't rise. I will get back. I've done, I can't find any more upward mobility, so it's time to come home, But ladies and gentlemen, I wish we had more time. I do have something else I have to go to here. I just tell you, I know that I've grown remote from my hometown. I know I've grown remote in rank from some of you who served and all. But for all that, for how little I know of you, I know a lot about you. I know your character because I've seen it tested on 100 different battlefields. And I'll just tell you that so long as we keep growing people like you, who believe in this country, who keep the faith when there's 100 reasons in some people's mind to lose faith, the ones who have initiative and aggressiveness, they don't ask other people to do it for them. They get out there and help each other do it. When I look at the kind of people that you bred in me and all my friends, and I know we were rascals in high school, ma'am, but we turned out okay at times, for all of our jumping off the Blue Bridge, which enraged the... but really what we're all doing it for right now, by the time you get my color hair, we're doing it for the young folks. So let's just make sure we keep that fundamental friendliness between us. Don't let someone start telling somebody that, oh, those people, because in that political party they're terrorists, or in that political party they don't care about anybody, or in this political party they want to give up the country. Don't let it, fight it out politically, and then go have a root beer together. You know what I mean? Let's keep it together. Thanks very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Secretary.
Well, thanks very much, everybody. Go ahead, please.
On behalf of the CBC Veterans Education and Transition Services, we'd like to, first of all, thank Secretary Mattis for taking the time to come speak to us today, and thank you all for joining us as well. We do have, I can just take it out, a CBC Boots to Book shirt to give you in appreciation for coming to see us today.
Hey, thanks very much. Thank you so much. Yeah.
If I can have all of my CBC students come up quickly, we're going to take a group photo with Secretary Mattis. Thank you.
We're asking for CBC students and the vet-only class coming up for the group photo at this time.
How's everything going?
It's going okay.
I'm going to head up. Me and my dad are going to head out here.
I know. Okay, these are veterans, CBC students only, please. And could we have the staff and board of Columbia Basin Veterans Opportunity Center up front? Can we have the Board of Directors and the staff of Columbia Basin Veterans Opportunity Center to the front, please? Right away.
Okay.
Quick, sir.
Whose phone is the other one?
Okay, folks, can we have just a moment? Pardon me. Can everybody back up, please? And let's get the secretary back up on the stage. Well, they did. They got to have a picture taken with him, and he talked about them already. Yeah. Yeah.
I want the original.
They walked really slow.
I never had the really. Today just